Record on this computer. Well, hello everybody. We're still reading Epictetus's Discourses. We're up to 118. Sam's new. Sam, you'll probably find that we read through them and we discuss them a bit, and it takes us quite a while to get through them. Okay. So this one's a little bit long. Why don't I start and we'll just pause halfway through and see what we think. It says that we should not be angry with those who do wrong. Okay, if it is true, as the philosophers say, that it is for one and the same reason that all people give their assent, namely because they feel that something is the case, or refuse their assent, namely because they feel that something is not the case, or by Zeus, that they suspend judgment because they feel that the matter is uncertain, and so also regarding motivation towards something, because I feel that it conduces to my advantage, and that it is impossible to judge one thing to be advantageous and yet desire another. If all of this is in fact true, why is it that we're still angry with so many people? Ooh, there's a lot in there already. Let's stop there for a second. So this is all about the kind of theory of impressions and how they work. And it's sort of a kind of a cornerstone piece of theory that you have to accept for Stoicism to kind of move forward, right? Would you say,
Yes.
Judith? Yep.
Yeah, so I just paused there a moment because I'm just getting the Greek up on the other screen. So 100%, yeah. So this is a very, well, it's a complex passage, but it's key because it kind of gets to the heart of so much of Epictetus's key message, which is around what is appropriate to assent to, and what is appropriate to desire, and what is appropriate to be averse to. And here he's identifying what's a key, I guess, Stoic paradox, right? Which is that it goes against the common opinion that how can we, the what's going on when we are angry with someone? What exactly is going on there? And he's getting straight to the nub of it. What is going on? And so he asks it as a rhetorical question. And so he's going to give us an illustration of a common kind of thing where somebody says, well, they're just thieves and they're just robbers. He'll kind of go through the common kind of statements around this kind of thing and identify what he thinks that is going wrong there.
Yeah, and before we even read ahead, we can kind of, if we know a little bit about Plato and Aristotle's arguments around acrasia, for example, we can see the direction it might take, right? Because we know that this is a Socratic or Platonic reading. We know that he's going to say, well, people think things are good, and when they think they're good, they're going to be directed towards those good things. So why would you be angry at them if they're naturally attracted to these good things that you just so happen to have, you know? This is the kind of thing that I'm expecting will come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see. They're thieves, someone says, and robbers. What does that mean, thieves and robbers? That they've fallen into error with regard to what is good and bad? Should we be angry with them then, or merely feel pity for them? Just show them where they've gone wrong, and you'll see how they desist from their faults. But if they fail to see it, they have nothing better to depend upon than their own personal opinion. So this thief here and this adulterer shouldn't be put to death? Not at all. But what you should be asking instead is this. This man who has fallen into error and is mistaken about the most important matters, and thus has gone blind, not with regard to the eyesight that distinguishes white from black, but with regard to the judgment that distinguishes good from bad. Should someone like this be put to death? If you put the question in that way, you'll recognize the inhumanity of the thought that you're expressing and see that it is equivalent to saying, should this blind man then, or that deaf one, be put to death? For if the greatest harm that a person can suffer is the loss of the most valuable goods and the most valuable thing that anyone can possess is correct choice, then if someone is deprived of that, what reason is left for you to be angry with them? Why, man, if in unnatural fashion you really must harbor feelings with regard to another person's misfortunes, you ought to pity him rather than hate him. Put aside this inclination to take offense and give vent to hatred. Who are you, man, to make use of these expressions that are favored by the mob? Away with this cursed wretched. Oh, sorry. Away with these accursed wretches. Very well. But how is this? Sorry. How is it that you've suddenly become converted to wisdom and are now in a position to be severe towards other people? So we'll pause there. So yeah.
So Epictetus says these thieves and robbers, they've fallen into error. So they have made a big mistake about what's good and bad. So what's the appropriate response to that? It's not to be angry with them, it's to feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
At the same time, as we see in section 5, the sort of indignant response from the ordinary opinion type person, so they shouldn't be put to death, they shouldn't be punished. But that's not what Epictetus is saying. He's saying that we should be thinking about the whole thing in quite a different way. Thinking about these bad judgments in a sense is analogous to disabilities, because he mentions the deaf man or the blind man. Do they deserve to be put to death just because they're deaf and blind? Well, obviously not. So these people have got a far more serious disability with regard to their judgment. And so we should be, we should be taking that into account and not just being angry and not, and also he mentions in section 10, the mob, we shouldn't just jump on a bandwagon in regard to our judgment. But, if everyone says, oh, these people should be whatever, we don't just jump along with the mob. We think about what's the more appropriate response, particularly since, as it says in section 11, well, it's not very likely that we've suddenly become wise and in a position to make those judgments.
Yeah, it's highly likely we're making the same mistakes as these other people that we're blaming. Yeah. And obviously, this hinges on the first part, that people think that they know what is good and act accordingly towards it. But when we find out, or when we act poorly, it's out of ignorance, and we're really harming ourselves in acting so. So like Judith's saying, very well said, is yeah, it's rather than being angry at these people, it'd be maybe more appropriate to have pity. Is that the real word in Greek? Do they really say pity? I guess it must be something like that.
There's a note in this edition that points out, while the Stoics don't usually recommend pity, that's another big question. But let me just double check in the Greek what the word is. Oops, now I can't find where I'm looking up. Okay, section 9.
But that should be true if you know how character is really developed. If you're a philosopher, you wouldn't put so much weight on anyone else.
Yeah.
Who's struggling.
Just curious about that particular word, pity.
Yeah, sorry, Courtney. The my Greek thing's not playing ball at the minute, so I'm not in a position
that's okay. That's fine. But I guess it makes sense, right? Like if you were sitting with somebody that you felt was not doing so well because they were badly depressed, for example, you might feel something like pity. Yeah, so I guess it makes sense. Anyway, moving along then. Why then are we angry? Because we attach value to the things that these people steal from us. Simple. Well, stop attaching such value to your clothes and you won't be angry with the man who steals them. Don't attach value to the beauty of your wife, and you won't be angry with the adulterer. So it's pretty severe recommendations here. Recognize that a thief and an adulterer belong not among the things that are your own, but only among those that are someone else's and aren't within your power. If you give these things up and count them as nothing, with whom can you still feel angry? But as long as you attach value to these things, you should be angry with yourself rather than with these people, those people. For consider this, you have fine clothes and your neighbor doesn't. You have a window and want to air them. Your neighbor doesn't know where our human good truly lies, but suppose that it lies in having fine clothing, which is exactly what you think too. Won't he come along then and steal those clothes? Why, if you display a cake to gluttons and then gobble it down all for yourself, aren't you just asking them to snatch it away from you? Don't provoke them. Don't have a window. Don't air your clothes. So true.
Yeah, just on a sidebar on that, you can kind of translate this image to a whole world of ostentation and display that, of course, we now see on social media. You know, people displaying it might not be their clothes, but it might be their car or their holiday or their amazing house or the amazing place they're staying in, or somewhere people feel impelled to kind of display these extraneous things that really have nothing to do with their own merits, but they're just a function of wealth or just empty display. And then they're upset when something happens to, you know, maybe their amazing views spoiled by someone coming into the picture, or maybe, you know, their amazing holidays ruined by some failure of someone else. So all these things are so fragile, I guess, and so readily able to be upset or disturbed. And really, the problem is with making a display of them in the first place, as Epictetus says.
Yeah, totally. And these things, if we make the thing, the object itself good, then there's not enough to go around. There's always the haves and the have-nots. I see it all the time with the prison crowd because Sam, I work in the prison, and I had a really interesting conversation the other day, and I see both sides of it because one of my jobs, I'm a security consultant. So I go to the client's house because they've just got robbed, and they're like, it really happened. This lady was in a car, and young people came and robbed her at knife point and kicked the kids out and her out on the street and stole the car and everything. But then I was in prison on the same day, and there were prisoners telling me about how they do this and how they rob people and creep in their houses at night. They even call it creeping. We were creeping in the house. And they get in the house and they're just stealing luxury cars and things like that. And the reason they do it, because they said, oh, do you sell the cars and make lots of money? No, just for thrills, just for kicks, just the same reason why you want to have a luxury car. And they record it and put it on Instagram. Why? Because that's exactly what you would do too. You would put it on Instagram. Look at my G-Wagon. Well, they do the same thing, except it's not their G-Wagon, it's yours. But they're enjoying the same things that you get to enjoy. It's just that they can't afford to get it in a legitimate way. So they go after the same good in whatever means they can go after it. So the world hasn't changed at all, has it?
And in the clothes example, you could see the thief like ostentatiously parade in those clothes in the public square.
Yeah, and if you remember the 90s, when Reeboks came out, people were getting robbed for their Reebok pumps. Remember that?
Yeah, it's kind of a symmetry, isn't it, between the people who display these things for the sake of it and the people who steal them and then display these things for the sake of it. So it's a complete symmetry. It's amazing.
But both of them display them in confusion that it's them.
That's right, exactly. It's a category error on both sides.
Yeah, and I think the category error is the important bit. Like, it's easy to skip the important part of the psychology here and say we could do something superficial, for example. We could say, all this is about is minimalism. Just don't have stuff. But it's not. It's about something bigger than that. And he says here, for example, recognize that a thief and adulterer belong not among the things that are your own, but only among those things someone else's and aren't within your power. It's always concerned with what's within your power. So the reason why externals are problematic are not because they're finite resources necessarily. It's because they're not within your power. They don't belong to you. They're not part of your makeup, what you're born with. Yeah, and in fact, there's not much that is within your power. The things that are within your power are these rational capacities, your metacognitive kind of abilities to reflect on reason, to think about thinking, to make judgments and things like that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'm happy to keep reading now, Courtney, if you'd like a break.
Yeah, you go for it. I got a bit of a dry throat. Go.
Okay. So, and this Epictetus sort of segs into his own little anecdote here, which is it's cool. 15. Something like that happened to me the other day. I had an iron lamp in front of my household gods, and hearing a noise in front of my window, I rushed down only to find that the lamp had been stolen. I thought to myself that the thief had been driven by a quite persuasive motive. So what of it? Tomorrow, I told myself, you'll find an earthenware lamp. After all, one can only lose what one has. I've lost my cloak. Yes, because you had a cloak. I've got a pain in my head. Well, you don't have a pain in your horns, do you? Why are you annoyed then? For our losses and our pains only affect the things that are in our possession. But the tyrant will chain. What? Your legs. But he'll cut off. What? Your head? What, is he incapable then of chaining up or cutting off? Your power of choice. It was for that reason that the ancients urged us to follow this precept, know yourself. So what follows? That we should practice by heaven with little things, and after beginning with those, pass on to greater things. I've got a headache. Don't give expression to grief. I've got an earache. Don't give expression to grief. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't groan at such things, but that you shouldn't groan in your inmost self. And if your slave is slow and bring you the bandage, don't cry out and pull a face and exclaim, everyone hates me. For in truth, who wouldn't hate such a person? From now on, placing your faith in these principles, you should proceed on your way upright and free, not trusting in the strength of your body like an athlete, for you're not meant to be invincible in the way that a donkey is. I'll just go on to the next section, I think. Who then is the invincible human being? One who can be disconcerted by nothing that lies outside the sphere of choice. And that's what you identified as the key thing, Courtney. I will go on then to consider the various circumstances in turn, as one would do in the case of an athlete. This man has carried off the victory in the first bout, so what about the second? How will he do if it's baking hot? How will he do at Olympia? It's like, it's totally like a sports commentary. So likewise, in this present case, if you offer him a bit of money, he'll view it with contempt. But what if it's a nice young girl? And if it's in the dark? And what if it's a touch of glory? What if it's a dose of abuse or some praise? What then? Or if it is death, what then? He is capable of overcoming all these things. What then? If it is baking hot, or in other words, if he is drunk? What if he is feeling depressed? What if he is asleep? Now, that is what I really mean by invincible athlete.
Yeah, I think the psychologists really enjoy this part of it, because there's a kind of idea of training involved here too, isn't there? Start out on the small things, guys, learn how to extend your sphere of choice over all the kind of more minor things that are easy to kind of master and conquer, and work up to the much more tempting things. In fact, cognitive behavioral therapy has a whole it's part of its behavioral repertoire. They do these exposure therapy kind of hierarchies, and you list the small things first and work up to the more difficult things, and aim to kind of make progress from the simplest to the much more distressing, obviously. So in that way, it's kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting how I guess it sort of the baby steps of things like, you know, people complaining about their headache or their earache. And, you know, that seems kind of obvious that there's no point in complaining about your headache or your earache. But when you think about it, these are the kind of everyday complaints you hear every day from people in the workplace or wherever. You know, people are always complaining about their aches and pains. But it's kind of, as Epictetus says, it's kind of that those are the baby steps you can kind of get beyond. But then he brings a more challenging scenario. You know, well, what about if you're in a position where someone in power, a tyrant, he says, does something really serious to you? Even so, even if the tyrant does something quite violent, he still can't affect your power of choice. And he says at section 20, from now on, placing your faith in these principles, you should proceed on your way upright and free. It's not about your body, it's about your power of choice. And then he goes on to identify this invincible human being by using the analogy of an athlete, while mentioning all the kind of typical things that can affect an athlete's performance, you know, whether it's whatever the weather's like or whether they're open to corruption. And that's a really interesting point. You know, obviously, I mean, in our own day, athletes can be corrupted by drugs or you know, perennial issue around gambling and financial corruption. But he mentions all these different things that have the potential to corrupt people's power of choice. Essentially, that's what he's referring to. And the athlete or the person who can resist or withstand all these different ways of becoming corrupted, that's what he says by an invincible athlete. And that's something that everyone can aspire to.
And it's a very, oh, sorry, you go, Sam. Yep.
I was going to say, and does that mean the athlete is really an expression and a potential outcome of a way of expressing your character as it's developed? It's the step behind it. In the same way that we're not buffalo and we're not cattle, and we don't, you know, when he uses the example that we're not pack animals, we're not donkeys. We're the rational creature developing and untangling their character behind those things, expressing them potentially in that, and it's more generalizable.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe, but I think they like the idea of the athlete. I think that's picked because it's very Roman, you know, the gladiators, the athletes, the Olympic Games. And you might have a favorite athlete, you know, Usain Bolt, whatever. But how will he go on a hot day? You know, how will he go in Australia? How will he go in England where it's cold? They're the kind of things he's asking here. And he's saying the same about us in our everyday experience. So he's really saying life's a gymnasium. You go outdoors. And this is the thing, you don't need to invent special techniques really in Stoicism, because the world already is equipped with all of the opportunities for you to make use of things in the world. Like, you will inevitably have to use things in the world, external things. That's what it means to be in the world. And so inevitably you will use these things in the world. So start thinking about how you ought to use the most, what's the word, less tempting, you know, the less triggering things first. How can I deal with a headache? How can I deal with a sore toe? And then hopefully you'll be able to work up to those real tempting challenges. I mean, fundamentally, I think in Stoicism, they're all the same. Whether it's a sore toe or execution, it's nothing of any big concern. This is at least how the Stoics kind of presented. The only thing that matters is your own character and your use of things. And your character is revealed, like you say, untangled or whatever, but your character is revealed through your use of things. So if you think things have inherent moral value, that circumscribes your character. That's the kind of character you have. But if you think things are, you know, you use things because you know how to use reason rightly, that things themselves don't have any grand moral value in themselves, rather it's the use of them, that says something about your character. That's the kind of character you have. I mean, that's how I see it. Do you see it similarly, Judith? That kind of idea of character being revealed through the use of things? Or do you sort of have a different
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a funny thought, you know, wouldn't it be great if we had someone to come along and actually steel man the position of, you know, the person with the fancy clothes on Instagram or whatever, or, you know, wouldn't it be great to have someone, because we all agree, right, on the limited value of externals, and the we're all on the same page. But I just, it'd be kind of cool to hear from somebody who might be able to argue why we should care about the kind of clothes that are, you know, good to wear, or the kind of car to drive. So somehow I just had the thought it would be good to have someone who could present the materialist and the externals point of view to the best of to its best you know, favor. But
and I'm sure they could, you know, but I think that's why the Stoics and maybe other ancient people are taking a very embedded kind of point of view, as opposed to something more modern, like we have this Cartesian view that we sometimes talk about here. And the way I see it, and that's why I like this idea of revealing your character through the use of things, because it indicates a necessary relationship between your character, your inner self, and the outer world that you are embedded in through your interactions. The other way of looking at it is sort of saying, well, my character is independent of things in the world. I'm either good, I'm either bad, I have my own character. It has nothing to do with external things whatsoever. It wouldn't matter whether I treated them well or poorly or not. That has no reflection on the kind of person I am. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think the Stoics are in the former view that our character is directly revealed through the ways in which we use things.
yeah, and I think we see sometimes the second of the two viewpoints you mentioned there. We sometimes see it, Sam. I don't know if you're involved in kind of Stoic Facebook groups at all, but quite often this particular approach comes up where people say, "Well, I don't care, you know, as a Stoic, I don't care what anyone thinks about me, and I don't care about what other people do, and I'm just doing my own thing, and I don't care about anyone else." So I think that view can come across, but I don't think that's an authentic interpretation of where the ancient Stoics are coming from, because they were very much, as you say, Courtney, embedded in the world and responding to the challenges of the common opinion and custom and you know, common values and all those things. And so yeah, I think it's a very key area.
My guess is that a few of the modern Stoics and just modern people in general are resisting the embedded qualities of the West. They're taking up they're using a Cartesian frame, and they're exotifying some Maya aspects of an escape from reality in a Buddhist and an Eastern lens, and concocting that all together in really an immature personal philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case for some. But yeah, ultimately, I think it reveals, you know, not a very close acquaintance with the actual text.
And if I had to get a guess, and I know nothing about Buddhism, but I would guess that if someone really knew their Buddhism, they would probably have a very similar philosophy. They'd probably be like, no, Buddhism shouldn't be taken in this modern Cartesian kind of perspective. It's not about you being separate from things. Actually, we're all part of creation and we're deeply embedded in it. I would guess, if I had to make a guess. I wouldn't be surprised. And one thing I want to point out here too, just as a novel bit of information that Judith will probably be able to tell me exactly where it is. One of the commentators or other Stoics later on makes a comment that Epictetus's lamp gets sold at some exorbitant price at the market because he's so famous.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, after his death, his famous lamp, you know, featuring in Discourses, sold for a record price. which kind of is so, you know, it summarizes so much of
It's so
what he's
ironic.
saying.
It's ironic because he's saying, I'm going to buy the shittiest lamp out there. Still didn't work.
Oh, goodness.
All right. Shall we do 119?
Sure.
That one's pretty
Sam,
long
do you want to
too.
read?
Yes, but just letting you guys know, I have the Robert Dorbin translation.
That's fine. I think Courtney and I both have the Robin Hard, but you know, I mean, it'll be quite interesting maybe to compare. So
The Dobbin's fine. I had that one before. I like it. Yeah.
How should 119? How should we act towards the powerful? A person who enjoys some advantage or just believes they do will invariably grow to be arrogant, especially if they are uneducated. The tyrant, for example, will say to you, "My power is supreme." Well, will you do something for me then? I want uncurbed desire. Do you even have that to give? I want my aversion error-free. Do you have that? How about a faculty of impulse that is faultless? No, you have no connection to that. Look, you entrust yourself to the pilot's expertise on board a ship and to the superior skill of the driver when you're in a carriage. It's no different with other skills. So what does your advantage amount to? Everybody gives me their attention and respect. Right, and I pay attention to my blackboard, wiping it and washing it, and to my oil flask. I'll even drive a nail in the wall. Does that make these things better than me? No, it just means they are useful to me somehow. I look after my horse too. I wash its feet and brush its coat. The fact is, everyone looks after themselves. If they curry favor of you, it's if they're carrying their horse. Who is there that respects you as a human being? Who wants to be like you, to emulate you the way people emulated Socrates? Do you want to finish there or continue?
maybe I was going to say carry on, but what do you say, Courtney?
Yeah, a little bit more is good.
But I can cut off their head. Ah, good point. I had forgotten that I should look out for you, as if I should look out for some virus or infection, and erect an altar to you on the model of the altar of fever at Rome. What frightens most people and keeps them subdued, it can't be the tyrant or his bodyguards. What nature has made free can only be disturbed and hampered by itself. The person's own thoughts unnerve them. If a tyrant threatens to chain our leg, whoever holds his leg in high regard will beg for mercy, whereas the person who cares more for his character will answer back, "Go ahead and chain it, if that's what you want." And you don't care? I don't care. Just wait, I'll show you who's in charge. How do you propose to do that? Zeus himself has given me freedom. He was not going to allow any son of his to be enslaved. You're master of my corpse. Come help yourself to that. What about when you petition me for a favor? Isn't that proof of your regard? No, it's me looking after myself. If you press the point, I will conclude that in the process, I give you the same attention I give my dishes.
That might be a good place to stop. I love your style, Sam. Very, very nicely read. Actually, there were a few little differences, weren't there, Courtney? With our version, I'm pretty sure it said donkey instead of horse. Now I'm going to have to go back to the Greek and check on that.
Yeah, I ended up stop reading because I was getting distracted. Oh no, he says donkey here.
It says donkey in ours, but in Sam's version it said horse.
Oh, okay.
So I will have to check on the Greek at a later stage. Yeah, I think this whole passage is a kind of analysis of power and what people think it is, and what it really is. You know, the person who says, "Well, don't you know who I am?" Essentially, you know, don't you know I'm a very powerful person? It turns out, you know, people, this person who's throwing their weight around, we don't trust them in the way that we trust a skilled naval pilot. We don't trust them in the way we trust a driver, because this person doesn't have any particular skills. And it's just that everyone pays him attention. And it's like, well, okay, we just do that when we're doing the washing up.
Mm.
And bit by bit, Epictetus is kind of taking apart all the pretensions of the person, and showing that their power really amounts to very little. And in fact, when he gets to section, well, he actually asks in section 6, do people really want to be like you as they want to be like Socrates? And the only response to that the powerful person has is a threat of violence. And then Epictetus says, "Oh, well, you're just like a disease, but one sort of a vague threat, and that the form of respect one should pay to a threat like that is the same kind of feeling that must have prompted the altars to fever at Rome. A kind of a malignant deity. That's not a very nice thing to be considered as a malignant deity, but Epictetus is saying, well, that must be what you are. So, and in section 9, Epictetus reminds the questioner that, well, Zeus, remember Zeus is the person who has set each one of us free, and so our body is neither here nor there. The tyrant might have power over that, but that's it. That's as far as it goes.
And it reminds me of Boethius. That's what I was looking for on the bookshelf, but I can't find it. Because Boethius writes this bit of a poem in there about the powerless power of the tyrant. And he writes this short poem about it. It's exactly like this. It's, how powerless the tyrant actually is, and that he calls his power, but it's actually a powerless power. And we see here Epictetus unrobing power and showing it to be powerless. We don't say COVID is powerful, even though it's scary, for example, and that it could compel people to behave strangely. It's just something to be avoided.
And I think this unmasking of power, or sort of, it comes, we can kind of see it in real time. For example, there's a TV executive who was recently paid out with a golden handshake, and now it turns out there are a dozen women who basically were harassed by this person, and if they rejected him, then he used his power to end their careers. And obviously that's an abuse of power, and it happens in so many workplaces, not necessarily taking that same form, but a slightly different form. And to say that, well, that's just to say that the person in the power in the workplace really only had power of a certain aspect of people's lives. Ultimately, people in these petty positions of power don't have power over people's character, even though they think they do. They think they're so important, they think they're so powerful, but ultimately they're just, all their power is just an illusion. And just one thing needs to change, and suddenly the narrative gets flipped and everybody can see what they are. But that's what Epictetus is doing for us here.
And it seems to me that it's not the tyrant that has even real power or petty power over other people's impressions. It's them putting stead in their impressions or things that they wish to value, and that's offering power to the tyrant.
Yeah, there's definitely a big element of that. You're right, Sam.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And because it goes back to the first, number 18, which we just read. Remember the one before where he said, well, the reason why people do what they do is because they make judgments about the value of certain things. They decide that X is a good thing. And as soon as you make the judgment that X is a good thing or X is a bad thing, you will behave accordingly. So it's all in the judgment of the person. So the only reason that the tyrant has any power at all is because of the judgment that the person makes that they are powerful or not powerful. So, and they could just as easily change their mind and go, fuck that. He's just some old dude. I'm not worried what he does. And yeah, it's a really good point.
Let's just check how long this passage is, shall we? Should we just, how long is this chapter? Quite a long one.
Oh, the thing about the cooking too. I just wanted to grab that bit too, because he does make the point, which is important to notice, I think, that of course I try to do the right thing by the tyrant. I'm not trying to piss him off on purpose, not because I'm scared of him or that I judge him to have a certain kind of power, like in the sense that most people think of it, you know, in the kind of common mobbish way. But I will do what's good for me, you know what I mean? Like I will pursue what gives me the best advantage to doing well in life, and that means yeah, I will pay lip service. I think he makes that point, right? I will pay lip service if necessary to some degree. Is that what he said?
I'm not sure. Which passage did you mean?
He said something like how will you do that? There's set me free. Do you really suppose that he would allow his own son to be turned into a slave? We said that. You're master of my carcass. Take that. See, this is a different reading. So you mean to say that when you enter my presence, you'll pay no attention to me? Question mark. No, but rather to myself. But if you want me to say that I'll attend to you too, I'll reply that I'll do so in the same way as I do to a cooking pot.
That's right, because he said earlier about he had to wash his cooking pot, you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a mechanical or routine, yeah, thing. Lip service, as you say, Courtney. Yeah, for
It's
sure.
functional, you know.
Yeah, functional. That's
I'm
right.
not an idiot. I'm not going to let my leave the soup in the pot for 3 weeks because it'll wreck the pot. And same thing when I'm dealing with tyrants. Like, you know, doesn't mean I have to betray my judgment, but I'm not going to make things really bad for myself, am I? But for some reason.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point around how you relate to people, isn't it? Because he's kind of saying, look, to a certain extent, just go along to get along, but don't actually betray yourself, really.
Oh, I think if you think this through, it's really, really, really interesting and can tell you a lot about maybe a kind of relationship therapy that's hidden in the Stoic work. And I've thought about it quite a bit. It's sort of like if people are doing what Epictetus is talking about, like making false attribution of good to external things, and you can see that that's what they're doing because you've learnt this theory, that means that when they get angry at you and they're blaming you and they're trying to control you or whatever, that one, you're not angry at them because you know why they're doing it, and two, you're going to respond to them in ways that put them at ease. You're going to make them feel safe. You're going to console them. It's all right. Don't worry. Don't see me as the enemy because I can see what you're doing. I'm not the thing that you're actually afraid of. I'm just another human being in the world with you. So it would make sense rationally that you would be trying to put them at ease, maybe even educate them, but if the person's quite hostile, that would be pointless. So you would be at least trying to calm them down and make them kind of more reasonable, not stir them up and kind of provoke their kind of imagination any more than it's already been provoked, kind of idea.
So their faith in petty power is another type of blindness from the chapter before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a disability in a sense because it blinds them to all these other things that are salient, because all they can see is their own importance, and that's a misjudgment. That's yeah, it's another aspect of their flawed judgment.
And the flip side of this, and that same argument applies, but in just flipped around, is what happens when you find things that you find incredibly pleasurable or desirable. Instead of a tyrant that you're scared of, that you think has some power over you, instead you lose your control over reason and judgment by thinking something is extremely desirable. So same argument can go in both directions. All
right, well, I'm happy to keep reading. I think there's only a couple more sections in this chapter. All right, so section 11. This isn't a matter of mere self-regard, because it lies in the nature of every living creature that it does everything for its own sake. Why, even the sun does everything for its own sake, and so indeed does Zeus himself. So, sorry, just a sidebar on this. It sounds so obvious, but it's actually a kind of a technical point of Stoic theory that every living thing, and Epictetus says even the sun, even Zeus as well, pursues its own self-preservation. Now, again, that sounds obvious, but it's technical. It actually is quite technical and not quite as obvious as you might think. And it has implications for the Stoic view of human and animal life. So I'll just say that. But when Zeus wishes to be the rain giver and fruit bringer and father of gods and men, you can see that he can't achieve such things or earn such titles unless he contributes to the common benefit. And in general, he has constituted the rational animal to have such a nature that he cannot attain any of his own particular goods without contributing to the common benefit. And so in the end, it isn't antisocial to do everything for one's own sake. After all, what do you expect? That one should show no concern for oneself and one's benefit? How, in that case, could all living things have one and the same principle of action, namely attachment to themselves? What follows then? When people come to hold absurd opinions about things that lie outside the sphere of choice, taking them to be good or bad, it is altogether inevitable that they'll end up paying court to tyrants. So that brings together a whole, everything he said up to now. And if only it were the tyrants alone and not their flunkies too. How is it that when someone becomes wise all of a sudden, when Caesar appoints him to take care of his chamber pot, how is it that we at once find ourselves saying, Felicio made such wise remarks to me? How I'd like to see him pushed off his dunghill so that you'd come to regard him as a fool again. Epaphroditus, that was Nero's secretary, who was Epictetus's owner at one stage. Epaphroditus owned a slave who was a cobbler, but sold him because he was utterly useless. And then, as chance would have it, he was bought by a member of Caesar's household and became Caesar's shoemaker. You should have seen what respect Epaphroditus showed to him then. How are things with you, my good Felicio? Tell me, do. And then if someone asked us, what is your master doing? He would be told, he's consulting with Felicio about some matter. But all the same, hadn't he sold him as being utterly useless? So what had turned him into a wise man all of a sudden? This is what it means to value anything other than what lies within the sphere of our choice. He's been honoured with a tribune's post. Everyone who meets him offers his congratulations. One kisses him on the eyes, another on the neck, while his slaves kiss his hands. He arrives home to find the lamps being lit. He climbs up the Capitol and offers a sacrifice. Yet who has ever offered up a sacrifice because his desires are rightly directed, or because his motives are in accord with nature? For we offer up thanks to the gods for those things in which we place our good. Someone was talking to me today about the priesthood of Augustus. Leave that well alone, my friend, I told him. You'll be incurring no end of expense to no purpose. But when contracts are drawn up, they'll be inscribed with my name. Do you suppose then that you'll be present when people read those contracts so as to be able to say, that's my name written there? And even if it would be possible for you to be present on every occasion now, what will you do when you come to die? My name will remain. Carve it onto a stone and it will remain just as well. Come now, who will remember you outside Nicopolis? But I'll wear a crown of gold. If you wish to wear a crown of gold, take a crown of roses and put that on your head. You'll look much more elegant in that. What a brilliant passage, right?
Yeah, that's really good, isn't it? I think, I always say it, but Epictetus is definitely my favorite Stoic. I know you might love Seneca more, but I just love his style. And it's not even his words, right? We're reading Arrian, really.
Yeah, so I think this first passage, so sections 11 through to 15, that were the first bit I read just then. Again, it's quite technical. So every creature, according to Stoic theory, does seeks its own self-preservation, but also that kind of contributes to the communal benefit. And as he says in 14, it isn't antisocial to do everything for one's own sake, because it's kind of reciprocal. When somebody does something, inevitably they're doing something that affects the community, I guess. And so people need to have, this principle of people seeking their preservation is key to all consideration of everything else in society. And so he says in 16, well, what follows? What are the implications of this? And one of the implications, as he then says, it's not just the tyrants throwing their weight around, it's the flunkies, it's the people who suck up to them, it's the people who take this mistaken view of what is good and flatter them, and take their position to be important. And he gives this example of his own former master, Epictetus, who sacked this guy because he was useless. But then when the guy got a job with someone else that was really important, then he's sucking up to him again. And so these mistaken ideas around what's appropriate and what's right and what's good and what's evil affect all these relationships, particularly in the workplace, I would say.
Yeah, really good point. I mean, you make it in a way that's quite different to the way I make it, but yeah, it's a neater way. The way I would kind of look at it, it's exactly the same thing that you're talking about, but just to put it in a different way for Sam too, it's the theory of oikeiosis, right? So it's this idea that, as he says here, Zeus has made man. He has constituted the rational man to have such a nature that it cannot attain any of his own particular goods without contributing to the common benefit. The idea is that, like you said, Judith, we are designed by nature to naturally move towards meeting our constitutional needs. So if there's something lacking in us, like we're thirsty, we need something in order to continue our survival, then there's a movement of the organism towards the things that will restore the constitution. And that is a natural and healthy act. But what happens is, according to the commentators around this, is that once the constitution is preserved or restored through the use of these external things, it also has an accidental association where you feel pleasure as a result of meeting that constitutional top up, if you like. And unfortunately, we tend to confuse that non-essential thing, the pleasure, for example, with the actual end. The actual end is to meet the needs of the being's constitution. So if we lose sight of what we're actually intending to do, i.e., meet our rational ends, which would be conducive to the ends of other rational beings and the whole cosmos in general, if we forget about that because we're distracted by pleasure and gain and status and things like that, we are no longer doing the kinds of things that rational beings ought to be doing. We're no longer meeting our rational constitutional ends. In fact, the world's become kind of absurd. Like the cobbler that you think is a terrible cobbler is now your boss, and the world has become unnatural, basically. That's my reading of it too. There you go.
That's like the difference between Antinous and Odysseus. And that Odysseus could be caught on feminine pleasure many times, either in Circe's house or Calypso's house, and could decide, well, this is a good enough instantiated version of what I think I'm looking for, that I'd settle for it. And Antinous, in the pursuit of his own good, but not in the pursuit of, but probably in how he thinks it should be, how it's impressed, he's the first to die. And his word and his name means the one who doesn't know, the one who doesn't learn.
Yeah, I think you're more up with than I am with Odysseus. It's a long time since I read the Odyssey, but yeah, I think Odysseus is a bit of a archetype. Well, he's an archetype in a number of respects, but probably, yeah, I think you're right. I think he's an archetype of the hero who is vulnerable, I guess, to temptation in the form of powerful women such as Circe. But I'd have to read up a bit about Antinous's role. But yeah, I'm sure you're right. You're right that his name is means that. So yeah, and of course, Greek and Roman audiences always had these Homeric archetypes in mind in thinking about all these things.
Yeah, and if that's the case, it's no wonder the men turn into pigs, right? Because they're no longer living as rational beings. They become swine. And that's a common theme in the Stoics too. Don't let yourself become a pig. Don't become a fox or a wolf or a lion, you know.
And I remember as the opposite path that Odysseus takes there, when all his men sort of subjugated themselves to becoming pigs, he waved a sword at Circe. And she's an immortal, so the sword couldn't kill her. A lot of people call it a sword of discernment.
So, right, okay, that's a great point, yeah.
So it's two ways you could go with that problem, like making yourself a pig or choosing what's not in your control.
Yeah,
so,
good
so
point.
why is the sword called discernment?
Because she can't be killed, you can't actually threaten Circe with death, with the power of the tyrant, because she's a deathless god. So the sword is then something more like the truth, to have choice of like how you would deal with Circe on this side and that side.
You know,
not to make.
Freud would say it's a phallus, and it represents the angry, aggressive sexual instinct of the hero, and through it he subjugates the unruly feminine force or something like that. But anyway, we're not doing Freud today.
But we should probably do some Homer at some stage, just saying.
No, that's very interesting though. Yeah, we should do some Homer. How would that work? That's quite big and long. We'd have to
Yeah, it's probably not manageable, but we could do some key bits. Best of.
what I've done to teach myself Homer quickly is that there's a Gareth Hin's graphic novel.
Okay.
And it's a little bit, you could use it almost as an animated storyboard, you know, to pace yourself through either the Iliad or the Odyssey, to just have the story back in your mind, which I think is appropriate for a Homeric tradition because they're marinated in it constantly. You know, they're learning it, they're seeing it every year.
Yeah, no, you're right. And Plato tells us that's what they did in school, was sit on a bench and recite Homer. That's what they did. That was education. So yeah. I thought that, sorry, just going back to the Epictetus for a minute. At section 25, I think he asks a good question, because the person who gets the tribuneship goes up to the Capitol and offers a sacrifice, which is another form of kind of conspicuous display, right? Going up to the Capitol and offering sacrifice. But Epictetus asks, well, who's ever offered up a sacrifice because his desires are rightly directed? You know, if you make the right decisions all the time, you're not going to, that doesn't require you to go and make a conspicuous display about it. And if you're acting in accordance with nature, you don't go and make a song and dance about it.
But it also raises a kind of question of like, well, why don't we? You know what I mean? Like there's a question of piety in the background. Like we worship the wrong gods. We should really know what we've been given, and then we wouldn't have to rely on diviners and augurs and medicine men and things like that. Because actually we've already been given everything that we need in order to be happy. So we should
Yeah,
give
and
thanks to that, you know.
and also, if you remember at the very first section we read today, where was the lamp? The lamp was next to his household gods. So Epictetus has got the household gods, and he presumably makes offerings to them. So he does take part in the conventional cult, whether that's the household gods and the also the civic gods. So yeah, I think you're right, Courtney, to say, well, maybe we should be making those sacrifices when we do act in accordance with nature.
I think so too, and I think a lot of people when they talk about the way that you would control manage impressions, for example, in a technical way, they always talk about it in a very CBT way. Like, for example, what you're trying to do is, you know, control your beliefs and whatever, and so that you'll have certain whatever behavioral outcomes, you know, that kind of language. But they very rarely talk about this attitudinal side of it. Like, what is the normative Stoic attitude to have? It's not necessarily being tough and never crying and things like that, which sometimes is like obviously a poor way of setting it up. It's probably much more like what we're talking about, the attitude of waking up in the morning and being able to go, oh wow, look, I'm alive, I'm in the world, and oh my god, this is the best of all worlds, not in some Panglossian way, but best of all worlds, because I've been given this superpower to make use of reason regardless of whatever happens to me today. It's kind of an adventure, it's awesome, I'm going to make the best use of it. Oh my god, so I'm so glad I've been given that particular capacity to do so. How exciting. And there's an attitude there, an attitude of, now I want to go out and be in the world and experience it and interact with it. But they don't often talk about that in the modern way of exploring it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it is an adventure and an opportunity and a forum for gratitude.
Yeah, and I've personally modified the language I use to think about it. Like I talk about revealing, and I think I borrowed this from, you know, the phenomenologists. Like, so my use of things reveals who I am. So part of the question of impressions is not merely what is actually there. Yeah, that's part of it, but also what does my use of this thing say about me? You know, what does it reveal about me? And there's some control in that about what gets revealed because it depends on my use of things. And the other part of that is the world is given to you. So part of my language has changed to this idea of things are given. The world is given to you. It just feels like I can be much more grateful in that way. Looks like we've frozen.